France, 1944. An M4 Sherman meets a German Panther across open ground. The Panther has thicker frontal armor and a high-velocity gun that can kill from farther away. The Sherman may need a side shot. The Panther can aim straight at it. On the specification sheet, the verdict looks obvious. But armies do not fight on specification sheets. That same summer, American armored divisions broke out of Normandy and raced across France with the Sherman as their principal medium tank. Was the Sherman really inferior where it mattered? Or does the famous comparison measure the wrong battle? Start with the uncomfortable truth. Against the Panther, and especially in a frontal engagement at long range, most Shermans entered France with serious disadvantages. The Panther mounted a long, high-velocity 75mm gun. Its sharply sloped frontal armor was extremely difficult for the standard Sherman gun to penetrate. The Tiger added even greater weight, armor, and an 88mm gun with a fearsome reputation. The common Sherman in Normandy carried a shorter 75mm weapon. It fired an effective high-explosive shell, but its armor-piercing performance was not designed to make the Panther's glassy and easy target. Later Shermans with the 76mm gun improved American anti-tank power, yet even that weapon could struggle against the strongest German frontal armor. The scarce high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition that offered better performance was not available in anything like unlimited quantities. American tank crews understood this difference without needing a post-war chart. When a hidden Panther fired first, no doctrine, production statistic, or comforting slogan could protect the men inside the Sherman. Tanks burned. Crews were killed and wounded. Units lost vehicles at a rate that could shock new replacements. Operational success did not make those tactical disadvantages imaginary. It revealed something else. A tank duel asks which vehicle is more likely to destroy the other under a particular set of conditions. A campaign asks whether an armored formation can find the enemy, cross difficult ground, coordinate different weapons, repair damaged machines, replace losses, carry fuel and ammunition forward, and keep moving when the original plan breaks down. The Sherman was not merely a gun facing another gun. It was the moving center of an American combat system. United States armored doctrine had emphasized mobility, reliability, and exploitation. The medium tank was expected to attack through or around a breach, strike into the enemy rear, destroy softer targets, and keep the advance alive. That mission did not eliminate tank versus tank fighting. France proved that American crews would encounter German armor whether planners wanted it or not. But it explains why the Sherman was built around a different balance of qualities than the Panther or Tiger. Its 75mm gun was dangerous to infantry positions, buildings, field guns, trucks, and many armored targets. Its turret could traverse quickly. Its automotive design was mature enough to support long movements. Its internal layout and controls were generally workable for crews spending exhausting days inside the vehicle. None of those qualities looked dramatic beside a table of armor thickness and muzzle velocity. All of them mattered once an entire division began to move. Crew efficiency was not a soft statistic. A tank commander had to observe, understand radio traffic, direct the driver, select targets, and control the gunner while dust, noise, fear, and fatigue competed for his attention. The loader needed room to handle ammunition quickly. The driver needed controls that did not turn every road march into an additional test of endurance. Hatches and escape routes mattered after a penetration. A machine that reduced even a little of this human burden gave its crew more attention for the enemy. These advantages never guaranteed survival, and different Sherman models created different internal compromises. But they explain why tank quality cannot be reduced to the shell that penetrates the thickest plate. A weapon reaches the battlefield through the actions of its crew. If those men can communicate, work, repair minor faults, and remain effective through a long advance, the design is producing combat power that no armor table records. The organization around the tank mattered even more. An American armored division could divide itself into flexible combat commands, then build smaller task forces for a specific mission. A column might combine Shermans with armored infantry, engineers, reconnaissance troops, self-propelled artillery, tank destroyers, anti-aircraft weapons, and maintenance vehicles. Radios connected commanders across that moving formation. When resistance appeared, the answer did not have to come from the Sherman gun alone. Infantry could clear close terrain and protect tanks from hidden anti-tank teams. Engineers could open a lane through mines or obstacles. Artillery could suppress a gun line or blind an observation post. Reconnaissance could search for a flank. Tank destroyers could reinforce the anti-tank fight. Ordnance crews could recover a damaged Sherman and return it to service. That was the Sherman's hidden armor. Not another inch of steel, but a structure that helped the tank survive mistakes, recover from damage, and apply force with other weapons. Normandy tested that structure brutally. The hedgerow country was almost the opposite of the fast armored battlefield American planners wanted. Thick earthen banks divided fields into compartments. A Sherman climbing over one could expose its thin underside while its gun pointed toward the sky. German anti-tank crews could wait at short range. Infantry and tanks easily lost contact. Inexperienced units sometimes discovered that a technically sound plan collapsed the moment visibility disappeared behind the next wall of earth. The answer was not a secret superweapon. It was adaptation. Tankers, infantrymen, and engineers developed methods for attacking the hedgerows together. Bulldozer tanks were valuable but scarce. Soldiers welded improvised cutting devices to Sherman hulls so tanks could push through the banks instead of climbing over them. The famous hedgerow cutter did not solve every problem, and its exact origin became the subject of competing claims. Its real importance was simpler. American units were changing equipment and tactics while the battle was still underway. The Sherman remained vulnerable, but the formation using it became harder to stop. If you value military history that separates battlefield evidence from mechanical legend, subscribe to Arsenal Archives. The breakout from Normandy is where that distinction becomes impossible to ignore. Operation Cobra shattered a narrow section of the German front. Once the opening formed, American armored columns did not move as solitary tank battalions searching for fair duels. Combat commands spread across several roads. Task forces bypassed resistance, seized crossings, and forced German commanders to react to threats already appearing behind them. Infantry, artillery, engineers, air power, and armor helped turn a penetration into a pursuit. The ability to divide and recombine was decisive. One task force could pin a defended town while another searched for a crossing. A reconnaissance report could redirect a column before it became trapped in a traffic jam. Artillery that remained within radio reach could support a fight without physically joining the leading tanks. When the enemy blocked the obvious road, the combat command did not have to spend every Sherman against the strongest point. This style of movement produced risks. Columns became stretched, flanks opened, and maps did not always match the roads. Yet it forced German headquarters to solve several emergencies at once. A Panther company could dominate the ground directly in front of it and still fail to stop an American task force passing somewhere else. In that kind of battle, reliability became firepower measured over distance. A tank with a magnificent gun offered little operational value if it was waiting for a tow, short of fuel, separated from its infantry, or unable to reach the threatened road in time. A Sherman did not need to defeat the Panther in every frontal exchange to create a stronger campaign result. It needed to arrive with enough comrades, communicate, maneuver, fire, refuel, receive repairs, and arrive again. American maintenance records expose the difference between a vehicle casualty and a permanent loss. Armored divisions carried their own ordnance battalions. Recovery crews established forward collection points, pulled damaged machines out of danger, and sent repaired tanks back toward their units. Some vehicles required major work farther behind the front, but many returned without disappearing from the division forever. The official history records 436 medium tank casualties from enemy action in the 3rd Armored Division between June and September. 200 of those tanks were repaired and returned to the division. That figure does not make the Sherman invulnerable. It proves the opposite. The division absorbed severe damage. But a specification sheet counts armor and gun power at the moment of impact. An operational record also counts what happens the next night. When a recovery crew reaches the vehicle, an ordnance team replaces damaged components, and the tank returns to a combat command. This machinery was not effortless. Spare parts ran short after Normandy. Mechanics cannibalized wrecks. Crews worked around the clock. Replacement tanks arrived with their own problems, and replacement crews could not instantly acquire the judgment of veterans. American strength was not an infinite warehouse floating above the battlefield. It was a demanding supply and repair network that had to function every day. The fact that it usually did function changed the meaning of loss. Then came Arracourt, one of the most revealing armored battles fought by American forces in France. In September, German panzer brigades attacked the 4th Armored Division in Lorraine. Many of their Panthers possessed the familiar advantages in gun power and frontal protection. American Shermans and self-propelled tank destroyers were outgunned in a direct comparison. If the specification sheet were the battle plan, the result should have favored the German force. The actual battlefield refused to cooperate. Fog and broken terrain reduced visibility, limiting the German advantage at long range. German attacks arrived without the coordination needed to concentrate their power. American crews maneuvered, used local cover, and engaged from flanks or shorter distances. Tank destroyers, artillery, infantry, and, when weather allowed, aircraft added their effects. Experienced American commanders shifted units toward danger instead of treating every Sherman as an isolated duelist. Arracourt did not prove that the Sherman was a better Panther. It proved that a Panther could not choose the geometry, timing, visibility, maintenance condition, and supporting forces of every engagement. A superior gun was still superior. It was not sovereign. This distinction also protects the story from another myth. The German tanks in France were not useless engineering failures waiting to be abandoned. A well-positioned Panther with a trained crew was a lethal opponent. German anti-tank guns were often even more dangerous because they were easier to conceal. American advance units could be hit before they identified the firing position. The Sherman paid heavily whenever speed became carelessness or combined arms broke apart. Nor did every American armored attack succeed. In close terrain, against prepared defenses, or without infantry and artillery support, Shermans could be stopped with terrible efficiency. When weather-grounded aircraft, one part of the Allied advantage weakened. When roads clogged or gasoline failed to arrive, operational speed vanished. By the end of the race across France, fuel had become a more powerful restraint on the American advance than any argument about tank design. Third Army operated hundreds of miles from the Normandy beaches and demanded enormous daily deliveries. The Red Ball Express used thousands of trucks to push supplies forward, yet the pursuit still outran the system supporting it. That pause offers the clearest answer to the central question. The Sherman's campaign performance depended on far more than the Sherman. It depended on bridges, radios, mechanics, truck drivers, artillery observers, infantry squads, engineers, airfields, depots, and commanders able to reorganize a force under pressure. The same was true for the Panther and Tiger, but Germany increasingly struggled to provide those supporting conditions while retreating across France. The specification sheet isolates the machine. The operational record restores the army. On that first sheet, the Panther deserves its advantages. It carried a gun and frontal armor that placed the standard Sherman in grave danger. The Tiger could dominate exposed ground under favorable conditions. American weapons and doctrine were imperfect, and the men who fought inside Shermans paid for those imperfections. But the second record asks different questions. Which tank could be produced in great numbers without remaining a factory experiment? Which one could travel with a fast-moving division, be maintained by a large field organization, share parts and procedures across thousands of vehicles, and return damaged machines to battle? Which army could combine its tanks with infantry, artillery, engineers, reconnaissance, tank destroyers, air support, and a supply network stretching back to the beaches? For the American armored divisions in France, those answers mattered more often than the fantasy of two tanks meeting alone on level ground. Was the Sherman inferior where it mattered? Against a Panther's front at long range, often yes. As the principal medium tank inside an army designed to move, combine weapons, replace losses, and sustain an advance, no. The Sherman did not win by becoming a Panther. American armored divisions kept winning because they used the Sherman as part of something larger than any tank. In France, 1944, the machine with the weaker headline specifications helped deliver the stronger operational result. That is what the specification sheet leaves out, and what the campaign record finally reveals.